Well, welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. There are times when we get together with people that can really rock your world, and this is one of them. I have been blessed, our ministry has been blessed for the entirety of its existence with a very special author and ministry leader. You're familiar, if you followed us for a hot second, you're familiar with Deeper Walk because we refer you to their materials on a weekly basis. They are amazing. And today I have the great privilege of meeting with former pastor, CEO of Deeper Walk International, and prolific author, Dr. Marcus Warner. Marcus, thank you so much for being here.
Well, this is fun, Nina. I appreciate the opportunity. So it's great to hear all the good work you're doing, and always an honor to find out that your materials are getting used to help so many people. So thank you.
Well, we are thrilled with the work that you've done for individuals through understanding the wounded heart. You know, that if we don't understand that we have an enemy, I mean, well, I'm preaching to the choir at this point, but definitely you have a unique gift, sir, for taking complex ideas and distilling them down into simple concepts that anybody can understand. And if you guys have been following us for a while, you've heard me refer you to Rare Leadership. If you lead anybody, you need to read Rare Leadership, because if you don't, you're not leading well. And if you don't understand this book, A Deeper Walk, Proven Path for Developing a More Vibrant Faith, you're completely missing out on what Christianity is about. But today, we are here to dig into joy. And Dr. Warner has written several books on joy, but today we're part of his book launch. This is exciting. It's called The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled People. And there's just so much like this. Look at how little this book is, but it is like every page. You need to just stop a minute and take notes. Like every page is going to be covered. So what caused you to write this book in the first place?
So, you know, I was just at a podcast with my daughter, Stephanie, and we titled the podcast 2 Words That Blew Up My Paradigm. And those 2 words were joy bonds. And basically, when I first came to ICBC, we merged Deeper Walk and ICBC together, and that became Deeper Walk International. And when I first came, I met Jim Wilder, and Jim was sort of the prophet of joy, right? He's the apostle of joy, if you will. He's like done all the neuroscience research that shows that the brain wants to run on joy, but if it can't run on joy, it will run on fear. And of course, if we run on fear for too long, bad things start happening. We break down emotionally. We turn into somebody we don't like. You know, it's like it changes who we are. And I had never really thought about joy in those terms. So getting joy into focus kind of changed my whole paradigm. It also helped me understand that in Christianity, we tend to be truth plus choices equals change. And realizing there's something deeper going on than just here's the truth, now believe it and do it. There's something called attachment. And if that attachment's in joy, it's transformative in a positive way. If the attachment's in fear, then it transforms you in a negative way. So for me, it just changed my whole worldview, changed the way I looked at everything. And honestly, fairly early on, I began to realize I was not quite as joyful as maybe I thought I was. I found pretty quickly that I had some work to do in my own life to develop those skills. So it was very personal to me as well.
Oh, that's powerful. You know, one of the neat things about you is you're the real deal. You know, your life speaks with credibility. You know, you have a podcast with an adult woman that your wife gave birth to, right? So you have these relationships, and when they're joy-filled, they last. You can navigate difficulty differently. So our audience is primarily Christian men and women who are struggling to save their hot mess of a marriage. And joy is a factor in all of that. And you've got a book on joy-filled couples.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. But this book can apply to anybody. But I did want to ask you some questions. You know, in this book, The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled People, there's some real solid truths about joy, and it applies directly to people as individuals that would then have them come to their marriage in a better place. So can you speak to that for a minute?
Well, let me just back up here and talk about what my co-author Chris Corsi calls the
Yeah.
joy switch, right? And then I
Mhm.
sometimes put a thumb on the side of my ear, like an on-off switch.
Yeah.
And the idea is that when my switch is on, I get my relational self. And we all have a relational self. It's like when you fell in love in the first place, your relational self was engaged. It's like, oh, I just feel alive. I feel more like myself when I'm with this person. We can talk about anything. This is all great. So most of us, it's not that we don't know how to communicate. There was a time in our lives we spent hours communicating, right? That isn't really the problem, that I don't know how to communicate. The problem is this switch. And that is that what happens is that when the switch is on, in other words, that means my brain is being run by joy, and joy is driving my personality and who I am, it's easy to communicate.
Mhm.
But when that switch goes off, I lose access to the higher levels of my brain function, and I turn into a different person. And I remember in my marriage, I did a little test on this when I was first learning about it. And the question was, how long does it take me to turn into a different person? How long does it take me to go from going, at the time, a 50-year-old leader, now I'm in my 60s, but how long does it take me, to go from a 50-year-old leader of of a national organization to a 5-year-old? And the answer was, about half a second, right? And
Oh.
all it took was a certain tone of voice from my wife, right?
Mhm.
And that tone of voice went right through, hit something, and my switch went off. And when my switch went off, what my usual reaction was, I would just shut down. I would just go, and it was like pulling teeth to try to get me to say anything at that point,
Mhm.
because I had learned that anything that I say can and will be used against me. So you're kind of like, and I learned that as a child, really, with my, some of my dynamics in that family. And so when I got married, I just brought that with me. And my wife really only had one tool, and that tool was to get me to talk.
Mhm.
And so when I'm shut down like this and she's trying to get me to talk, it's like poking the bear, poke, poke,
Mhm.
and finally it's like, all right, you want me to talk, you aren't going to like what comes out, blah. And so what I find is that for most of us, most of our problems in marriage happen because both of us have our switch off, right? If both of us have our switch off at a given point, it's literally impossible to have a healthy conversation. There's no
Mhm.
point in having the conversation at that point. You got to do something to get your joy switch back on first, or this isn't going to go anywhere. So taking a time out, taking a break, taking a deep breath, finding out how to do that. So that's
Mhm.
kind of where we move from the joy specifically related to marriage into just habits of joy-filled people. What do I do personally to begin building joy as a more normal part of my life? And what we at the heart of this book, we said that we all have an inner world, and in that inner world, there's either a fear house or a joy house. And if I have a fear house in my inner world, I'm not going to want to spend time there. And so I'm going to develop an avoidant lifestyle. I'm going to surf the internet. I'm going to watch TV. I'm going to distract myself constantly, because the one thing I won't like is quiet, right? Because when I'm quiet, I'm stuck living in my fear house, and it's the place I don't want to be.
Mhm.
And so part of that avoidance becomes addiction. And I fill my life with addictions that help me stay avoidant from all of these things. And so what we're trying to do is say, look, nobody wants a fear house in their inner world. How do we tear this thing down? How do we build a joy house in there instead, so that I can calm and quiet and be at peace and have a quiet heart and a quiet mind, and be able to think about happy things and let my mind set on those things. The idea is, again, nobody wants to live in a fear house. We all want to live in a joy house. So the idea of this book is to try to help people learn, what do I need to do personally, and not just relationally in my marriage, but what do I need to do personally to grow my ability to live with joy and not be stuck in fear.
It sounds to me, what's coming to mind as you're speaking about all of this is what we have in the Bible of the kingdom of darkness. And then what Jesus was telling us to do, which was repent, change your thinking. The kingdom of heaven is near. Like, we can live in this joy-filled place now if we choose to grow in this area. But that's not a switch you flip easily. Like, So talk to us about that. Because if it really was a switch, like who wouldn't just push that
Who
button,
wouldn't
right?
just flip the switch? So what
Yeah.
happens here is that behind this switch, there's a whole engine, right, if you will. And so what really needs our focus is the engine underneath it that makes it possible for us to switch this, flip this switch more easily. Daniel Siegel, who's one of the better authors on the brain science of attachment, calls this the window of tolerance, right? And the idea of the window of tolerance is that there's a certain range of emotion that I can handle. And but if my emotions go beyond outside of that range, that's when this switch flips. And so what I'm trying to do, the ultimate goal here is I want to grow that window of tolerance so that I can handle more of an emotion before my switch flips. And I want to also develop my skills to return and get back within that window when I do get overwhelmed. So there's two different skill sets here. One is how do I grow this? And the other is how do I learn to recover? So we have all of those represented in the 4 habits in this book. The first 2 habits really are related to how do I grow my capacity for these things. The second 2 habits are how do I get back? And so the idea is that I grow my capacity for joy in the same way that I would grow my capacity for muscle or for exercise. And you've got to work out. So there's a choice to be made. Yeah. But the choice is go work out. It's not just, you can't just say, I'm going to choose to go run a marathon today, right? That isn't going to work if you haven't been training. So there are choices involved, but they are the choices to do the things to grow my capacity that make other choices easier. So that's kind of the picture involved.
So you've got these calming habits and appreciation up front, which, I mean, I love the Forge. I want to plug this for your organization. You have a website devoted to a calendar, which over 28 days will cause people to develop this habit of joy. And I love the first habit or the first exercise. It's to just breathe. Hello. Because that's so important with calming and being present. You can't show appreciation. You can't do any of those things if we're not present, right?
Yeah, very true. So, they teach this, whether it's, so our friend Stephanie Hinman, we wrote a book called Building Bounce together, and her specialty is helping traumatized children regrow their ability to function. And they found that the key to helping these traumatized children is to grow their capacity for joy. So one of the first things that you got to do, though, is to regulate your upsetting emotions by regulating, how do I get control back? So, because what happens is when I feel a really big upsetting emotion, it triggers things in my body. My body gets agitated. You ever had a panic attack, or you ever had anxiety? Your ears get hot. You can feel like you're having a heart attack. You can have sensations all over your body. It's a very physical thing. Well, it's the same with all of our emotions are physical. And so part of what we're doing when we're calming and quieting is we're trying to regain control of our bodies from these emotions that have gotten triggered. And what they discovered is that these deep breathing, where I take control of my breathing, is one of the fastest ways to get back control of the body. So they teach this to the military and we teach it to children. And so Stephanie, I brought her up because I like the way she teaches it. She teaches it as blow on the soup and smell the soup. And so for little kids, this is great. It's like blow on the soup, smell the soup. Right. And so the whole idea is fill your lungs as full as they can be and hold it, and then empty them out. As empty as they can be, hold it, and then do it again. And what happens is you do this 5 or 6 times and you begin to retake control of your body from these big emotions. And that's why breathing is so important and why it's taught everywhere and pretty universally as a calming or quieting process.
Well, when you stimulate, it's going to sound kind of gross, but we all have those little hairs in our nose, right?
Yeah.
And they get stimulated for over 90 seconds. You're releasing serotonin, which calms cortisol, and it tells it, hey, baby, it's going to be okay. It's all right, And I love that. But let's tell our listeners, where can we find this 28-day challenge?
So we go to 4habits.org. That's the number 4 and then habits.org. Frankly, if you forget that and spell it out, it'll still get you there. But it's the number 4habits.org. And honestly, I think .com gets you there too. I don't know, but it's like not probably not actually. That's somebody else's. .org is ours.
Uh-huh.
So go to fourhabits.org, and we have there all of the books on joy that we've written. So you got Chris Corsi's Joy Switch is there. Jim Wilder, my book Rare Leadership in the Workplace is there, and as well as this trilogy of books that Chris Corsi and I have written together, and then this calendar that you can download, put on your refrigerator, whatever, and it gives you a simple 10 to 15 minute exercise you can do every day just to help begin developing the habit of joy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we want to issue that challenge to all of our, excuse me, all of our listeners. Really want you to go to fourhabits.org, download that thing and join us on this journey. We'll be talking about that more in upcoming podcasts, checking in with you with a wee bit of accountability to see how you're doing in that space. It is worth doing. If you're not joyful now, why not start? You got to do something to make that happen. This is a great tool for that. So I want to talk a little bit about trauma. I'm just to be real honest with you, I have a little bit of confusion because when we are in a new relationship, you're dating and you're, oh, I can't eat, I can't sleep, you're overcome with hormones, and it's, oh, I love this person, da, 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 da. Most of the time, that's pretty fun. It's a really good ride, right? Lots of joy. But the traumas that are from your childhood, they're still there, but they're not getting triggered. Like what's going on where something's calming down, like, because 3 years into the marriage, he hurts your feelings or she's upsetting you now. Like what happened?
That's an excellent question. The number one reason that addicts fall off the wagon and go back to their addiction is that they fall in love. It's actually the number one cause of it, because what happens is exactly what you said. You feel so much joy because that's what falling in love is. It is this joy rush.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're feeling a lot of joy, you have a lot of capacity. So when when we fall in love, we have this massive joy rush. And so when we have a lot of joy, we have a lot of capacity. And so what happens is when I'm in love and I'm feeling a lot of joy, these things that people do that would normally bug us, we can absorb them. They're well within our window of tolerance. It's like, it's not overwhelming at all because I've got so much joy. It's like on a scale, my joy way outweighs what's going on here. But in every relationship, you have a joy gap. And that is, so when you're falling in love, that joy gap's really short because even if you aren't with the other person all the time, you're thinking about them all the time. So you have joyful connections in your mind with this person on a regular basis. But what happens is as the time gets wider between moments of shared joy in the relationship, it gets easier for resentment to come in. It gets easier for hurt feelings to get triggered, for bitterness. And then what happens is as our joy levels are going down, now all of that trauma that's already under there becomes much more obvious. And what'll happen is we will default back to the fear bonding patterns that we had established early in our lives. And what started as a joy bond and a joyful attachment with somebody can transfer into a fear bond with them. And you can tell it's a fear bond when you aren't sure they're going to be happy to see you. And because you're not sure they're going to be happy to see you, you either give up and feel despair, or you try hard and you try to put on a mask and try to be what it is you think they want you to be in order to be happy to be with you. And again, all of these things are just flesh reactions, right? That's me in my flesh trying to make this work.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at here is I gotta shrink the joy gap and I have to deal with the trauma. And honestly, the two things go together because it takes a lot of joy to have the capacity to deal with the trauma. And so like we talk about, one is repair and the other is resilience. So you're going to have to do some repair work, but you're also going to have to do resilience work. And the resilience work is about joy and the repair work is about the trauma.
Wow. I'm so glad you highlighted all of that and explained it. We do a lot of work with couples, and we know that if you do new together, that's what we call it. You create a new habit, a new hobby that's fun and exciting. And even if it's just, we're going to go to a movie together because, that rush of adrenaline with the person, like it bonds you in a way. But there's all these positive inputs we have them do as part of the process, because the data is that if you solve conflict, if you get good at that, your marriage still is terrible if you don't have the positive inputs. And now this makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it was one of the things I noticed as a pastor when I would do a lot of marriage counseling when I was
Mm.
in that position. And one of the things I began to notice was that couples were working so hard on their problems that it was all they could see in their marriage.
Yes, yes.
Right. And so saying, what can we do to grow joy in this relationship was
Mhm.
a welcome relief for a lot of these people who all they ever talked about is, this is why I messed up. This is why you're messed up. This is how your messed upness is messing me up. It's like
Yeah,
it was just there was no break from it.
yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here. There's a time for each. And we want to make sure that there's enough joy in our relationship that it can help us get through those times when we have to focus on what is messed up.
Mhm. No, that's rich. That's absolutely good. And that brings you into this storytelling piece that's part of the book too, because stories, whether they're memories from the past or stories that you're making up about something cool in the future, like my husband and I are looking at buying a house right now, a farm. And if we don't get it, we're in that part of the process where we've countered and all that. I don't care. Our marriage is so awesome right now. We're just so connected and we're dreaming together and it's just been crazy fun. And we don't even have a new reality, but that piece of it, like I've noticed. And so like, talk to us though, because storytelling is in this book. Tell us more about that.
So we have 4 habits, right? And so the
Yep.
first 2 are calming and appreciating. And the second 2, then we said those have to do with resilience and joy. And then there's storytelling and attacking toxic thinking. Those are the
Mhm.
second 2. And those have to do with recovering.
Mhm.
So what I find is that storytelling, for example, I was doing a leadership training event at a business in Little Rock. And I had them first go around the room and each tell a 2 to 3 minute story of like some experience in their life. And it was interesting listening to them to tell their stories because all of them, without any coaching on this, told a story that went something like this. Like, when I was young, this bad thing happened, and that's why I'm messed up.
Mm.
Right. So when we tell stories, a lot of times what we tell is we tell stories that end with, and that's why I am messed up the way that I am today. And I'm like, well, we need to learn how to tell a different kind of story.
Yeah.
And so Chris Corsi and Thrive Today, they teach storytelling as I want to tell stories about how I acted like myself despite the
Mm.
emotion I was feeling.
Mhm.
I want to tell stories about how I returned to joy after what I experienced. Or I want to tell, if not, I can't have those. I want to at least tell stories with the point that I learned of what I wish I had taken away, what I wish I had done.
Mhm.
And so too many of us, our storytelling is constantly reinforcing that we're messed up, right? Our
Yeah.
storytelling is constantly reinforcing that's why I'm broken. That's why I'm not happy. That's why I'm angry. That's why, well, fill in the blank. And it ends with sort of a support or a justification of our dysfunction and our negativity. So what we want to have notice is that joy-filled people have the habit of telling stories that don't end that way. Their stories are like, I went through this hard thing, but my friends were there with me. And because of the strength they gave me, I got through it and we were all okay and happy to be together. It's like,
Mhm.
even today, as you know, I'm actually going to a funeral later this afternoon, right? It's a sad event, but we're going to be surrounded by people we love. And it's going to
Yeah.
be an opportunity to connect with family and with friends. And so what happens is there's the grief of having lost that person. At the same time, there is a capacity to deal with the grief that it is expanded by being around people you love and growing joy with them that helps to give the capacity for all the rest of it.
Mhm.
So you can tell a story about, being at something like this and seeing somebody and just the bittersweetness of the stories and the joy and the connection and and you bring those things together, so you learn to tell a different kind of story. And that's our point, is that we have to be watch. If I'm telling too many stories about why I messed up or like why I'm dysfunctional, why I'm
Yeah.
angry, right, then I need to learn to start telling stories that say, but this is how I recovered. This is what I am learning. This is what, here's a time when I did it right,
Mhm.
and begin collecting those.
Well, and so much of it too, if we believe that God is good, then even in the middle of something, we can go, I may not see the goodness, but I believe the goodness. And at the
Yeah.
end of it, we can say, we can look for that goodness, and that can be the story. And you know, so many people that's happened to, where they've overcome something horrible.
Well, and you find this out. It's like I've known people who couldn't find a happy memory, right? I
Mm.
mean, they were truly, you know, some of them were tortured as kids. I mean,
Yeah.
they were literally horrible, horrible, horrible. And yet, even with them, what I found is that most of them had a few things that brought them joy. Maybe it was a pet that they had. Maybe it was
Mhm.
being able to sit and look at a lake that they enjoyed. Maybe it was something that is. So what happens is you have to find things that you can remember that at least make you nostalgic, if not bring
Mhm.
you a full sense of joy.
Mhm.
You can start there. I had some, uh, but there we always say there's one forbidden rule in a joy exercise or an appreciation exercise, and that is you can't use the word but. Right? You
Yeah.
you can't say, "Oh, I remember this wonderful time when I got to, be, but this thing happened and ruined it." It's we do that a lot, right? We tell joy
Mhm.
stories, and then we transition to but, and we end it with, and that's why life is horrible again. And so
Yeah.
we have to be very careful about the stories that we tell ourselves and begin collecting stories that are much more focused on why there's hope and
Mhm.
why and how we found joy despite the emotion.
Yeah, that's so good and spot on, because if we don't do that, we're stuck in where we are, which is misery, well, darkness, kingdom of darkness.
Yeah.
So I want to, you have this beautiful chapter on attacking toxic thoughts. We're told to take thoughts captive, so, all right, talk to us about that. How do we attack? What's a proactive way of approaching this?
So my favorite presenter on this is Dr. Daniel Amen from Amen Clinics. And he talks about turning your brain into an anteater. And the idea of an ant is an automatic negative thought, A-N-T, automatic negative thought. So the idea is that we're used to thinking that my emotions are caused by beliefs. Right? We're taught that as evangelicals all the time. It's like your emotions follow your thoughts. Well, that's only half true,
Right.
because I would say that most of the time I have an emotion and that triggers my thought. In other words, my wife can do something that bugs me, and then when I start thinking about it, that's when all of these thoughts come up,
Mhm.
right? So it wasn't that I was thinking all of these thoughts and then I felt the emotion. She did something, and in a split second, it triggered the emotion before I ever had time to think about it. And then my mind gets involved and supports that emotion and says, "Oh yeah, here's 100 other times I felt it." And it goes through all this whole litany of things. And so when we talk about attacking toxic thinking, part of the strategy here is learning to recognize which negative emotions get triggered most often for you, right? Is it shame? Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it despair? What are the thoughts that are most commonly getting triggered for you? And come up with a game plan. And the game plan is you write down when I feel that thought, let's just say it's anger. When I feel angry at my wife or my husband, what are those supporting thoughts that almost always follow? And write them down. Like, she always does this. Why didn't she ever do that? And or he never, whatever. Just write down those thoughts. And then the next to each one of them, you pray. You say, "God, would you show me? Is there a thought you want me to have instead?" And let's come up with a replacement thought for each one that
Love
is a
that.
Holy Spirit thought rather than a flesh thought.
Mhm.
So that the next time that this happens and I feel anger and I go, "Wait, I recognize this thought train. I've seen this a lot." It's time to take those thoughts captive, attack those, and replace them. So that's the key word. I've got to replace those thoughts with something else. So having a battle strategy in place to help us do that is so important.
It is, and you make this sound like it's so simple.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. It's much easier to teach about it than to do about it. Yeah, we all know.
Well, and I would think it's fair that all of us deal with this. It's just
Yeah.
how much, right? And when are you going to start taking those thoughts captive and moving towards the kingdom of heaven and living in that? Because that's where Jesus wants us. That's where freedom is. And it's such
Yeah.
a
When I did a
powerful.
lot of marriage counseling, it was not uncommon for me to usually start by telling couples, "Well, it sounds like this is pretty hopeless."
Wow.
That
They
was
came
usually-
back.
Yeah, that was usually my first statement. I'm like, and,
Wow.
and the reality is, if you do this in the flesh, it is hopeless.
Yeah.
I said, but if you can learn how to do this in the spirit, that's where
Mhm.
hope comes from. And
Mm.
so we have to make a decision up front. And that is that regardless of what my husband or my wife does, I am going to commit to doing this in the spirit.
Mhm.
And when I lose it and I do it in the flesh, to getting back to being in the spirit as quickly as possible. Because without that, it's just my flesh against your flesh. And that always comes down to who's going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're fighting each other instead of our common enemy.
Yep.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Good points all throughout all of this. If you had 2 key pieces of advice you would give married couples, what would they be?
Well, number one is you got to shrink the joy gap, right? And that is, I think, like even in my own marriage, what I find is that I can get so focused on ministry and so focused on the next thing I've got to do. And then I'm tired and all I want to do is go check out.
Mhm.
That if I'm not careful, we can get a joy gap in there. And then I start looking at her different, right? She doesn't mean the same thing to me when there's a big joy gap. So we try to build some practices intentionally into our marriage to make sure that we are playing together on a regular basis, right? That we're appreciating each other regularly, that we nurture a rhythm to do these things. So we've done some of those things, because I've noticed that when we don't, right, it can start getting a little bit surly. And so you have to pull that back in.
Mhm.
So that's one. And then the second thing is I need to have outside people. I need to have people outside of my marriage that I can talk to about my emotions. My wife can't be my sole support system. My husband can't be my sole support system. In some cases, they're not a safe support system
Right.
because they aren't mature enough right now to be that. So I've got to have people outside of that I can talk to. Now, that doesn't mean that a woman should confide in another man or a man should confide in
Mhm.
another woman. That's the affairs almost always start with emotional bond, because you're getting an emotional attachment from somebody that you're not getting in your marriage. So that's
Yep.
not what we're talking about. We're talking about having just friends or groups
Mhm.
of friends that you can do things with, and also counselors, prayer ministers, and people that you can process things with outside of the marriage, and making sure that they are reinforcing the things that you want reinforced.
Mhm.
Because I find that the easy thing in our day and age is for people to say, oh, they're horrible, you're wonderful, just,
Yep.
be mad at them or give up on them. And that's not doing us a whole lot of good. So we got to make sure that we're building relationships with people who are going to reinforce what it is we're actually trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's sage advice and very, very powerful, supported by data all the way around. So good stuff there. So we want to send our listeners to Deeper Walk International. There are courses, there's ministry training. I mean, these guys are awesome, y'all. If you do not know about Deeper Walk International, consider yourself exposed, and you need to go over there and get info from them. There's a ton of great stuff on their website. And I believe it's deeperwalkinternational.org. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we can find your podcast, which is excellent information over there. Your daughter's amazing and wildly talented as well. Love to listen to the two of you. And you can find other books that Dr. Warner has written and other courses that you might get involved with. We highly recommend this ministry. It's been a foundational element to everything that Greater Impact has developed and walked forward in and working with couples and individuals. So we just thank you, Dr. Warner. We pray blessing upon your ministry and the people that you work with. And we appreciate you showing up today to do a podcast with us. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, Nina.